Hello, BookTube. We're in our third and, as Olive would say, our penultimate week of our Homer-along, our read-along of Homer's Iliad. And where we left things, things looked perilous for the Greeks. The Greeks had been besieging the city of Troy for 8-9 years, with forces pretty evenly matched, but then, over a petty quarrel, Achilles, one of the foremost Greek warriors, withdraws both himself and his fierce fighting men from battle, and they just hunker down in their tents. And this upsets the balance, and suddenly the Trojans, led by Prince Sarpedon and Prince Aeneas, and most especially Hector, the tamer of horses, are able pretty much to rule the field. And that's where our last read-along, our last segment, had things. Hector running rampant, the Greeks being pushed all the way back to their ships, all the way back to their barricades. And that's where our segment today takes off, with not only the Greeks and the Trojans pitched in desperate battle all over the field, but also the gods themselves out and about, despite the edict from the king of the gods, Zeus, for them to steer clear. In the segment that we're reading now, the queen of the gods, Hera, seduces her husband Zeus and gets him to sleep. This is a euphemistic way to put it. She distracts him so that the other gods are free to take a hand on the battlefield. And the two main ones are Apollo and Poseidon. And there are dramatic moments. I mean, there's plenty of violence between ordinary mortals. This segment that we're looking at now has, like all the other segments, has some brutally memorable moments of personal death in Bronze Age combat. Homer gives us a lot of those kinds of death now, and he does it with a cast of thousands. He's introducing characters all the time for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 lines only to kill them. And you'll notice when you're looking at those deaths that we always learn something about those characters, even if it's just a phrase. But sometimes it's a lot more than a phrase. Sometimes we learn someone had a little farm, or was the son of so-and-so, or kept bees. And there was a reason for that. It's a reason we've touched on a couple of times in this read-along, which is that these were performance pieces before they were works of literature. And so the bards who sang this stuff had a rotating repertoire. So if you had a nice 8-line piece about so-and-so, and you happen to be in his neck of the woods in the Peloponnese, or God forbid, at his family's table, well, then you add it. Whereas if you're over in Sparta and there's no taste for that, then you take it out and you swap it around. And what we have for the Iliad is a kind of gigantic, accumulated slow motion snapshot of one version of what was, in fact, a fluid performance piece. But that's why we get these people. That's why the modern sensibility would have it that if a character is introduced and we're told what they look like, how old they are, what their home is like, and how much their mother misses them, you expect they're going to stick around, and they don't. And Homer marries that kind of personal detail with incredibly gory details about how these people die, which was obviously also a fact that would please his audience. So we have one character gets a spear through the heart, and he lands in the dust, and we're told that the spear was vibrating with his heart until finally his heart gave out. Another character gets a spear through the face, through the eye. It knocks his eyeball out and goes straight through the socket and out the back. And then the warrior who threw the spear cuts his head off, helmet and all, and holds it up on the field of battle as a trophy with the spear still sticking out of the eye. And little details like that are indelible. Homer does them beautifully. There was nothing like them before this. As far as we know, in all of literature, there was nothing like them. Nothing that portrayed war quite this way. When you're reading these books of the Iliad, when you're reading, for instance, the chunk of books that we're doing today, you are left with absolutely no romantic ideas about warfare, hand-to-hand combat. None whatsoever. And the tide of battle swings back and forth because Zeus is not directly involved prohibiting things. He's watching the whole time, and he seems to know the future of a lot of what's going on. But Apollo is able to knock down Greek fortifications with his hand, and Poseidon is urging on the Greeks to fight the Trojans. Just usually taking the guise of a mortal, although you get the strong impression from reading these books that the mortals involved aren't really fooled. That they kind of sort of know that it's a god and not this, Joe from the next phalanx over. But both of them, especially Poseidon, are running rampant on the field, and Zeus has finally had enough. He chastises his wife for trying to mask his senses, and redoubles his edict that the gods are not to be involved in this conflict. And he sends his messenger, Iris, to the battlefield to tell that to Poseidon. He tells her, "Go and tell my brother to quit the field." And she does. She's a messenger god like Hermes. And she flies down to the battlefield and she tells Poseidon that your brother, our king, tells you to quit the field. And Poseidon mouths off. He's infuriated. Says, who does he think he is? We agreed, the three of us, 3 brothers, that we would take 3 separate spheres of influence. He would take the sky, I would take the sea, and our brother, I want to say Pluto, but I won't, Hades. Our brother Hades takes the underworld. But the mortal world is free for all of us. Who does he think he is telling me what to do? We were born the same in the midst of time. We are brothers. And he's furious. It says, basically, it's none of his business what I do. And Iris uses the tact that is classic to messengers from time immemorial. Pauses and says, effectively, she says, "Are you sure you want me to tell him that?" She politely reminds him that it's her job to relay what he says, and if he says that, it's also her job to remind him that Zeus is much more powerful than he is, and that it might not go well. And there's a moment, and then Poseidon reconsiders. Says, "I'm just steamed, that's all." Yeah, and then he does quit the field. And it's wonderful, although it always confuses me what the Greeks must have thought about these figures. In moments like that, where Poseidon, where this meek little messenger goddess has more tact and more awareness than the enraged king of the sea does, until she reminds him of his place, and then he takes a minute, a very human minute, to reconsider his options and their likely outcomes. And all of that is intensely human. And I read stuff like this, and this is not the only, of course, in the Iliad, the moments like this all over the place, where I think, okay, this is tremendously good dramatization of the nuances of human emotions. But these are supposed to be gods. I read these accounts, these moments, and I think no one could possibly have worshipped these gods, unless worship meant something radically different. And I get the impression from Greek mysteries and the ecstatic cults and whatnot that their basic idea of what it is to worship bore a lot in common. In fact, was the forerunner of a lot of what Christians took as worship. In which case, I don't get this at all. I don't. There are moments like I love them. Don't get me wrong. The gods are some of my favorite parts of the Iliad, but they are essentially just superpowered humans, and that always confuses me. Wondering what. I mean, the Greeks make an offering. You make an offering to Poseidon when you're about to go on a long sea voyage. You burn some fat or you tip some wine into the sand or whatnot. Was it a formality? It wasn't prayer. It couldn't have been. One way or another. One way or another. Once Poseidon withdraws his enormous influence from the battle, once the gods tend to withdraw, in this case, since a couple of all the key Greeks have been wounded, but a couple of key Trojans have as well, and including the loss of Sarpedon, Zeus's own son. And the tide of battle turns a little in favor of the Greeks, and it's helped along that way by a momentous decision made in the camp of Achilles, where Achilles' boon companion and best friend Patroclus decides that if Achilles won't enter the war, the most that Patroclus can do is to put on Achilles' armor and enter the war himself. Not maybe explicitly to disguise himself as Achilles, but more as a rallying banner. And he does. And he ranges across the field, killing Trojans left, right, and center, until he encounters a Trojan that he can't kill. Until he encounters... He has Achilles' armor on, but he's not Achilles. And when he encounters Hector, that's it. As it has been, as we've seen, for hundreds and hundreds of Greeks. And the death of Patroclus is the turning point of the poem, because the poem, the disbalance, and the theme of the poem itself was the wrath of Achilles, and the organic structure of the thing turns when that wrath is overcome by an even stronger emotion. And it is. when Achilles learns that his best friend has died at the hands of the Trojans, his wrath is overcome. And suddenly, at the end of this section that we're reading today, the poem is poised on the downward ski slope of its massive conclusion. And that's where we end today. We end with the death of Patroclus and with what will clearly be the momentous decision of Achilles to return to the war. Destined to kill Trojans, destined to kill Hector, even though his mother, the sea goddess, warns him about that because the prophecy is well known that he will not long outlive Hector. So she would rather that he not, but it doesn't matter. One form of extravagant emotional indulgence gives way to another in Achilles. And like the first one started the whole chain of events, the second one radically changes the whole chain of events. So that's what we're going to finish up on next week, is the last books of the Iliad, the conclusion of the Iliad. So this could rightly be viewed as kind of the moment before the big climax, and I want to know what you're all making of it, those of you who stuck along. My guess would be that some of you, especially those of you reading the Iliad for the first time, might have the impression this time around that perhaps the battlefield gore and fighting was wearing a little thin, that there's a little too much of it. There's more of it in this segment than in any other that we've read. If so, I'd like to hear it. And all the rest of it. Though I know there are quite a few of you who have been really enjoying, especially those of you going through it for the first time, have been really enjoying the gods, the active participation of the gods, their characteristics, their abilities, their fights between each other. So this segment should have pleased you. And once we're done with this, we'll move on to end out the Iliad, but I wanted to finish the video by pointing out that we still haven't decided what we're doing for July. In August, we're going to do the Odyssey, but what are we going to do in July? What are we going to read in July? There have been all kinds of suggestions all across the map. The one, of course, that strikes me as having the most pleasing symmetry is Meg, Steve Alton's novel Meg, about a gigantic prehistoric killer shark that goes a-feasting in modern days, which has symmetry because the movie adaptation is coming out in July. But that kind of bugs me because I've kind of wanted these read-alongs to not involve any financial outlay, where you can just, if you want to, you can just download the thing from a million different open source places online, including my beloved Project Gutenberg. And Project Gutenberg, for some mysterious reason, has ignored Meg. So I'm hesitant to make it Meg. I'd rather stick with classics, with stuff that's easily obtainable. But I'm happy to do it, and I'd also, depending on how much access all of you who are doing these read-alongs have to new releases, we could also do one of those. One way or another, we need to start talking about July, because it's right around the corner. Some of you work and have children and lives and loved ones, and you're going to need time to get some reading started. So let's, in the comments field, in addition to all of your reactions to this batch of books that we read this time around, I'd love to hear more suggestions about July. What we're going to do, something short, something summary, another classic, Pride and Prejudice, you name it, and we'll think about it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. Sorry to be so brief, but I got hit with a surprise deadline that I'm going to need to give it some attention. Once I've got some of it, 600 or 700 words under my belt, or a lot of research done, then I can put the camera back on and make another video with a clean heart. But until then, and right now with it hovering over me completely unformed, I feel a little odd doing it. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but feel free, let's chat in the comments field, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.